Hello, welcome to the Office of the State Historian's Tertulia Histórica. I'm Robert Martinez, State Historian of New Mexico. Today I want to talk to you about the sacramental lives of Indios, Castas, and Espanoles in Spanish colonial New Mexico. In this talk I'm going to talk about sacraments, Roman Catholic sacraments. Sacramentals are something else. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I just want you to know what the topic is for this presentation. So let's get started. This is a Manual de Parrocos. This is a front page for a book that all priests that were ministering to Native Americans and Casta people, mixed blood caste people, and Espanoles, Spanish people, all over the Americas, places like Mexico, New Mexico, Cuba, South America, the Philippines. So these guides were used by priests to help them in various situations so that they could do their best to promulgate the Roman Catholic religion under various circumstances. So what is a sacrament? We need to look at things from the Catholic perspective for this talk so that we can know what these priests were doing. According to the modern catechism of the Catholic Church, the sacraments are efficacious signs of grace instituted by Christ and entrusted to the Church, by which divine life is dispensed to us. If we can go back about 500 years, the Council of Trent in the 1500s defined a sacrament as a sign of a sacred thing. A sacrament is a visible sign of an invisible grace instituted for our justification. So for the Roman Catholic Church and the Greek Orthodox Church, the sacraments are baptism, confession, confirmation, Eucharist, marriage, priesthood, and anointing of the sick, or extreme unction. So those are the sacraments for the Catholic Church today and in the 1700s in New Mexico. So we need to talk a little bit about the Protestant Reformation because this has an impact on church history in Europe and in the Americas. Roman Catholic priest Martin Luther, he nailed his 95 Theses in 1517 at the church at Wittenberg in Germany. He was scandalized by what he saw as corruption in the Catholic Church when he visited Rome, and he saw the opulence and the wealth that the Pope and the cardinals and bishops and priests were living with, while people in Germany and other outlying areas of the Christian world were poor and did without. So his challenge was to address corruption in the Catholic Church. For our purposes, he also challenged the validity of sacraments except for baptism. He challenged that whole sacramental system, and I guess this is a good time to talk about what sacramentals are. When I say sacramental system, I'm talking about the sacraments. But in the Catholic Church, sacraments are what I just described, the 7 sacraments. But sacramentals are things like a blessed rosary, holy water, water that's been blessed, or the rite of exorcism. These are not sacraments, they are sacramentals. So the Catholic Church's response to Martin Luther was that it conceded that there was corruption in the church that needed addressing, and the Catholic Church needed its own reformation. The Council of Trent between 1543 and 1563 did just that. It wasn't a daily council or an annual council. It met more or less every 10 years. Essentially, a lot of things were addressed, but for our purposes, the Council of Trent rejected Luther's theological concepts of sola fide and sola scriptura, the idea that all you needed was the Bible and only faith to be saved. And it reaffirmed the 7 sacraments. It didn't say that Scripture was not important or that faith was not important. It just said that there was more needed, such as tradition and works. So one thing that came out of the Council of Trent that is important for us is that it mandated that priests, A, record sacraments, and B, keep better records of sacraments. We have to remember that the 1500s was an exciting period in Spanish history, in European history, and in world history. Just in 1492, Columbus had made his way to the Americas, and people really started to move around. They started to leave their villages, their towns, their cities, to go to other parts of the world. And before that, before 1492, there were sacraments. They just tended to not be recorded. People usually or typically would be born in one place, live their life in one place, and die in one place. So priests and communities knew who was who and what sacraments they had. But if you were starting to show up in other places, you needed to be able to prove that you had received certain sacraments so that you could, for example, get married, or prove that you had not been married before or entered into the priesthood, or if you were a woman, entered into a convent and taken vows. So this is an outgrowth of the beginning of globalism and the need to record what people are doing. So let's look at baptism, Bautismo. The Council of Trent emphasized the need for children to be baptized in the church by the priest. This was an ideal. The reality is that a lot of times people could not be baptized by a priest, and so it was okay for a nurse or a family member to baptize a baby or someone dying if a priest wasn't around, so long as the person used water and used the right prayer of baptizing. That would be in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So this happened, but this was an ideal. And what you learn from these books that the priests had to follow, it said that in the Americas, the Indians very commonly would bring their babies almost immediately after they were born. In other words, they didn't want to wait for Sunday or wait for a specified day that the priest wanted to baptize the babies. Rather, they wanted their babies baptized right away. I have a Mora example there because in northern New Mexico, in the town of Mora, I've done research, and in the baptismal registers, there's a note around the 1880s by a priest where he writes and describes the people of Mora as being very good Catholics, very devout, very loyal. However, he says he could not break the people of Mora of the habit of knocking on his door day and night to have their babies baptized, even though he would tell them that he would do it on Sunday at Mass. So I found this kind of intriguing, since it said that the native peoples would do this. It just means that people were very excited and worried, probably. They were just worried for their children and wanted them baptized as soon as possible. And there's an image of Bautismo, of a priest baptizing a little baby, a Native American baby. Casamiento y Velación. This is marriage under the Spanish system, and it's really fascinating. Casamiento y Velación just means marriage and veiling. And we'll see that in places like Spain, Mexico, all over the Spanish Empire, including New Mexico, this was the tradition of how you got married. So the roots of this system are not found in the Roman Rite, the Roman ritual. That's the Roman Catholic Church, the Latin Rite that most of the Catholics belong to. There's something like 14 other rites in the Roman Catholic Church, but this veiling ceremony we see as part of the Spanish Hispanic marriage ritual is not part of the Roman ritual. Its roots or branches can be found in the ancient Toledan liturgy or the Mozarabic Rite or liturgy found in Toledo, Spain. It is still common in Mexico and was once practiced in New Mexico. I know for the longest time, I thought when I would see a Mexican couple get married, they would have the lazo the rope put around both the bride and the groom, connecting them, tying them together, so to speak. And I always thought this was kind of a vaquero or ranchero or a Mexican tradition going back to kind of like cowboy days, but it really isn't. It has deeper roots in Mexico and in Spain. So let's talk a little bit about the origins of the Mozarabic Rite, and I call it the Mozarabic Rite. Mozarabs were Christians, Catholics living under Muslim rule in medieval Spain. This rite has sometimes been called the Visigoth liturgy, or a friend of mine recently called it the liturgy of San Isidoro, the medieval saint of Spain. But this is the cathedral church in Toledo, Spain. You can see this is the traditional front entrance of the church, and to the left you see a towering spire, and on the right you can see where another towering spire was supposed to go, but it didn't get built. But in the late 1400s, Cardinal Cisneros, he discovered that in Toledo there was a community of Christians called Mozarabes who were practicing an ancient Catholic liturgy, and it was almost extinct, but thankfully he gathered all he could, all the information about that liturgy, and he essentially modernized it for the times. It had elements going back 700 years, but also added certain elements from the late 1400s, and he constructed this chapel you see on the right hand side, the Capilla Mozarabe, and that is where to this day you can still go to attend the liturgy of the Mozarabs in Toledo. I went a few years ago. I had some time off in Spain while doing research, so I went to the Mozarabic liturgy. It was fantastic. It's fascinating. There's a group of priests that chant the liturgy in Latin, and I was so fascinated by it. I waited a while and I went back again. I attended twice, but if you get a chance, you need to go. So let's talk about the Mozarabic Rite. Again, Mozarabs were Christians living under Muslim rule. Prior to AD 711, the Visigothic Rite was an amalgam or a combination of rites from Rome, Gaul, and even Africa, Gaul being what we call France today. Once Muslim domination started in the 700s, the rite was essentially frozen in time with little or no opportunity for innovation or change. The good news is that the Moors, the Muslims, allowed for the Christians to practice their ancient rituals, and though no Islamic elements were introduced into the rite itself, the chanting of the Mozarabs reveal a heavy Islamic melodic influence. If you go to YouTube and just type in Mozarabic chants, you can hear this beautiful medieval music. There were attempts in the 11th and 12th centuries to change and modernize these rites, yet they met with resistance from the Mozarabes themselves. They wanted to hang on to their own ancient Catholic spirituality and rituals. It's fascinating because in this time period, the 12th century, the Roman Catholic Church was going under vast changes in order to make the Roman Rite, the Mass, universal and make it the same everywhere. But in certain places, like in Spain, there was resistance. Again, the Roman Rite was introduced in the late 1000s, but the Mozarabic Rite held sway in Spain and was essentially undisturbed. I want to talk about the fracturing in the Mozarabic liturgy. This is where when the priest consecrates the bread, he lifts it, he breaks it. That's the fracturing. What's interesting is in the Mozarabic Rite, the priest breaks the host, the Eucharist, into 9 pieces, representing in the vertical axis, making a form of the cross, the vertical axis, incarnation, nativity, circumcision, epiphany, and passion of Christ. And then the horizontal axis, the death and resurrection of Christ. And then the final 2 particles are the glory and kingdom, okay? So I found from the 1700s a page that shows how this would be placed on the altar in this shape right here, numbered 1 to 9. So what are the origins of this Mozarabic fraction? This unique method of fraction in which the host is divided into 9 particles and arranged symbolically on the paten in the form of a cross is somewhat similar to what existed during medieval times in the Gallican and Celtic rites in the 6th century. So that's a long time ago. You can see the parallels, the 500s in Northern Europe and the 500s in Spain. There's an image from the Capilla Mozarabe in Toledo during the liturgy. Again, so let's look at the speculative origins of some of these traditions that are brought from Spain to Mexico and ultimately to outlying areas like New Mexico. We have during these rituals the veil, arras. Arras are 13 silver or gold coins that are blessed by the priest, and the lasso. They may have been adapted from ancient Roman marital rituals by early Christians. Ancient Hebrews also did something similar, the veil representing the cloud that covered Israel in the desert when they asked to be covered by the presence of God while at the same time singing the Shema prayer of Israel. I have this quote here from one of my favorite books, My Penitente Land by Fray Angelico Chavez. On pages 63 to 64, he makes the tantalizing claim that the Franciscan Padres, when they came up to New Mexico in 1598, set up a makeshift altar where the Toledan Roman liturgy of Holy Thursday was celebrated in the morning. I can't find a citation for this, but he would be certainly referencing the ancient rite of Toledo, Spain. So let's look at the parts of the Hispano marriage ritual from the Spanish colonial period. Casamiento is wedding or marriage, okay? And this is what happened first. The couple would take vows. Typically these took place outside of the church, but sometimes inside the church. It was not uncommon for the vows to take place at a home. I've seen many records where it says that the couple took their vows at the home of a relative or a prominent citizen of the community. Traditionally, this was separate for the velación, or nuptial blessing, which took place at a later date. Typically, it would be about a week later. But I've seen documents where it's just a couple days later or even months later. And it's important to note that a marriage was not considered valid unless both the casamiento and the velación took place. The velación, this is the veiling, this is the nuptial blessing, the nuptial mass. Typically, marriage vows occurred with no mass. Those are that's the casamiento. The veiling mass or nuptial blessing took place on another day. Also, in larger parishes, there were separate books to record these rituals. One for amonestaciones, bands, that's where they would announce over 3 feast days or 3 Sundays that the couple were going to be married. This is so people would know, and if anybody knew there was an impediment to their marriage, they could come forward. And then there was a book for casamientos, the marriage vows. The velaciones, the veiling, were usually recorded alongside casamientos, and this had a lot of information, typically like parents' names and places of origin. In New Mexico, it was more common for couples to be married and veiled on the same day. Also, the nuptial blessing or the nuptial mass, veiling mass, this could be on any day of the week. Although it needs to be noted that during the Advent season, you could not have a velación, a nuptial mass, nor could you have one during the Easter season, Lent, or not until after the octave of Easter, 8 days after Easter. So let's look at this document. This is Información Matrimonial from 1685, marital information. This is where the first step. It's the 1st of May. This is a couple. The woman is recorded first, Doña Catalina de Herrera y Vargas. She's from Mexico City. That's where this document is from. And lists her parents. She's a legitimate daughter of Diego de Herrera and Inés de Vargas. They have Don and Doña, so these are some relatively high-level people. And she's marrying Don Francisco Vázquez de Zúñiga. He's from the pueblo de San Juan del Rio, and also a resident of Mexico City. He's 10 years in that area, and he's the son of Hernando Vázquez and Doña Juana de Zúñiga. On the left, you see in the margin the couples where they're getting married at the Church of Santa Catalina. Martinez says that they're dispensed because of a third grade or third level relationship of sanguinidad. They're blood related at some point in their family tree. So here's the Libro de Casamientos, the Book of Marriages. This is about 5 days later, 6 May 1685. This is their record that they're getting married, legitimate marriage. And on the left you see their names, that they're getting married in that church, okay? So if you look closer at that margin, it says that the veiling, the velación, took place the next day. So they were in a hurry to make this valid. The 7th of May, 1685, they were veiled. Velaron los contenidos en esta Santa Iglesia. Here's an Información Matrimonial for Casta people. These are mixed blood people. They had to go through the same thing. This is, it looks like Luis de Sanabria. He's a mulatto esclavo. He's a mulatto slave, and he's marrying a woman, Ana de Burgos, who's mestiza. So these are mixed blood people, and they are getting married in Mexico City. So here's the Matrimonio record. On the right, you see the full record. It shows that the couple are getting ready. It just lists their names. And on the left, it shows they're veiling. Velaron en la Santa Iglesia. They got married on the 7th of February, and then they got veiled on the same day. As far as the velación tradition, in addition to the veil, which is part of the tradition, this is a good time to explain what would happen. The couple, after they take their vows a few days before, would go to the door of the church. This was all planned. The priest would meet them there, and they would have the arras, those 13 coins I told you about, either gold or silver, 13 representing the 12 apostles and Jesus, and they would have the anillos, the rings. And the priest would bless these, okay? Poor couples, especially in a place like New Mexico, they typically did not have the arras, the rings, and the coins, so the church would often have these in the church to be used for the ritual, and then they would take them back for the next couple. In the church, during the Mass, during the velación, a veil would be placed over the shoulders of the bride, and it would also cover the groom to signify or symbolize the unity of the couple. And also, I have the word yugo there, that's a yoke or a rope. This would also be the lazo that would tie the people together. I've seen images of people in Spain and Mexico using a very large rosary for the yugo or the lazo. And often the couple would hold a candle. So these are the traditions, that we had here in New Mexico. They change by about 1850. You see that the coming of the United States changes the traditions of the Spanish Mexican people of New Mexico. We get a different type of Catholicism with Bishop Lamy and French priests coming to New Mexico in the late 1800s. Although I've seen documents, marriage records from the 1880s where they are still written in Spanish in New Mexico, and it says, the priest says, "Casé y velé," I married and veiled this couple. So there are still vestiges, and you can still see it in Spain and Mexico. Here's an image. It looks like it's probably from maybe the 1940s, 30s or 40s. This is a velación in Spain, and you can see the woman's veil is covering the shoulders of the groom, and there's a string or a rope tying them together. Here's another velación image from Spain, more contemporary, more modern, and yet still there's the yugo or lazo, the rope connecting the novios, the married couple, and there's the veil. The young man, the young groom, is holding the veil in place, and it looks like the padrinos are putting the lazo and veil in place for them. Here's an image of a velación from Mexico. This is the couple is going to be connected by what would be a lazo, but it's a rosary. It's a large rosary. And here's another velación from Mexico. You could see the rosary connecting them and the veil uniting the couple. I like this image because it looks an awful lot like what you see in Jewish marriage rituals. This is an image of a Muslim wedding, the veil over the heads of the couple. Again, the same idea. And the reason I put this image in this presentation is we have to remember that Spain is very Catholic in the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s. But before that, Spain was also Muslim and Jewish. So some of these rituals likely mingled with Catholic medieval rituals to create something unique that was promulgated throughout Spain and probably spread throughout the Spanish Empire in the 1500s and 1600s, well into the 1700s. These manuals present a lot of information for priests. They're mission priests, they're missionaries, and they're going to places that are not Christian or Catholic, and so they have to come armed with spiritual remedies to deal with what they would perceive to be evil influence or witchcraft and sorcery. So one of the sections in this book says de los hechiceros, of sorcerers, what to do. Again, from one of my other talks, I've talked about this. Sorcery is created through magical means and is considered a form of superstition. This is information that the priests had at their fingertips. It's one-on-one as opposed to a coven or group magic of brujeria or witchcraft. The priest was warned to take note that demons can use science, powers, and knowledge to use natural elements, taking them as instruments, making it possible for sorcerers to injure people, animals, and crops. It follows that sorcerers also use diabolic figurines of those individuals who they want to cause trouble or to injure. You see this in a lot of cases in New Mexico, in Mexico and in Spain. It's universal in Northern Europe as well, and also in the Eastern United States. The idea that dolls, puppets, or wax figures would be used to stick pins into or to burn and to injure people. Exorcism, exorcismo. This is also something that priests were thought to encounter quite a bit in dealing with non-Christian communities, and the idea is that they needed to be armed with this spiritual remedy. There's another image priest casting out or protecting a person who's being tormented by evil spirits. And this is a front page from a Práctica de Exorcistas y Ministros de la Iglesia. This is a practical manual for exorcists and ministers of the Roman Catholic Church by Father Benito Remigio Noidens. Antwerp is where this was from. De la Sagrada Religión de los Clérigos Regulares Menores, from the Holy Religion of the regular clergy, minor clergy. The book also provides how to deal with love magic. Love curses were believed to be used by sorcerers to control love or hate in a person, and it is certain they cannot have the desired effect with anything indicated, because this depends on the free will in whose place it is to injure or to force someone to love. This was common in New Mexico, people using spells, going to curanderas or hechiceras or brujas, and also men, brujos, hechiceros, curanderos, to try to excite love or hatred in people in the community. We see this in the records, and the priests had to be able to address this. One case from the 1750s, 1751, involves two of my ancestors, Barbara Garcia and Catalina Gutierrez. Barbara was accused of having illicit relations with a married man, and was accused of using spells to control love emotions of her target. Obviously, and typically, the man is not named in the document. But Barbara was accused by another woman, and then Barbara in turn accused Catalina Gutierrez of telling her how to control her man by cutting off some of his hair and putting it in a cinturón, a belt or a sash, and putting it around her waist and using it to cast a spell on him. Ultimately, she stopped doing that. But eventually, about 20 years later, Pedro Antonio Gallegos married a woman named Maria Margarita Garcia, who's listed as the out-of-wedlock daughter of Barbara Garcia Hurtado. So it's my suspicion that Maria Margarita Garcia was the offspring of Barbara Garcia and her unknown lover. These books counsel the priest, and therefore counsel the priest to tell his flock, whether they be Espanoles, Spaniards, Castas, caste people, or Indios, Indians, never to ask a sorcerer for help. Why? Because it is not licit to ask a sorcerer to undo one curse with another. Sorcery, according to the book, was the dark art of the devil, and it involved a pact with the devil that the sorcerer would enter into. It also warned that there are rare times when a sorcerer actually seems to help. An example, using magic to dispel hailstorms that might damage crops. There's also warnings that a lot of people are actually just deceitful, and they pose as sorcerers and take money from people or goods from people, claiming to heal them when they actually can't. You can also see how curanderas or folk healers could get caught up in this. Sometimes when I've done research, I've read about in places like Mexico, there's a town there that's supposed to be a town of witches, brujas, and the priest there said that they're just tricking people. But when you read what the brujas do, a lot of it just looks like what curanderas do, which is using plants to help heal people, to expel pain, physical pain, or emotional pain and anguish, anxiety, or spiritual hauntings and other such beliefs. So that's it for this presentation. There's a lot more on this topic, but the sources that can be found in libraries or even online that I use for this presentation: first, the Itinerario para Párrocos de Indios, and then the Manual de Párrocos por el Padre Miguel de Venegas de la Compañía de Jesús. It's a Jesuit priest from the Society of Jesus who provided that manual. Remember, This is the Office of the State Historian of New Mexico. I'm Robert Martinez, State Historian. You can contact me at 505-476-7911. My email address is rob.martinez@state.nm.us. And please visit our website at www.newmexicohistory.org. Thank you for listening, and please come back. Hasta pronto.